right, Herle Burlyites. If it's another week, it's another show. This week, Bill 21, Quebec's secularism law that cost a Muslim schoolteacher her job a couple weeks ago. A furor has resulted in the land, or at least on Twitter. Politicians are condemning it. Mayors are funding opposition to it. We're going to try to understand it. With me today is André Pratte. For many years with Presse newspaper, he chronicled Quebec's constitutional and language wars. From 2016 to 2019, he was an independent senator until he resigned from the chamber. Now with the consulting firm Navigator, he's one of Quebec's most astute analysts and a leading voice in that province. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today, Mr. Pratte.
Thanks for having me.
So how are you? And where are you? Where do I find you right now? And how are you doing?
I'm at home, like most people, because the government of Quebec has again advised people to work from home. So I'm at home. Where I live is called Nuns Island. It's a small island just across the river from the island of Montreal. And from where I am, I have a beautiful view of downtown Montreal and the Montreal. And so I work from home most of the time now.
That's between the island of Montreal and the South Shore, right? Nuns Island?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You drive over the Champlain Bridge, you go right past it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's called Nuns Island because it used to belong to nuns, but there are no nuns left anymore. It's more a golf course and condo towers, but it's a beautiful place to live, and it's a 10-minute drive to downtown, so it's very practical also.
Right. That name will become oddly relevant to our discussion in a few minutes. Before we get to it, most importantly, do you have any answers for the Montreal Canadiens? Like, what is going on? What can we do?
Oh, that's an even tougher question than Bill 21, right?
Well, of course.
Yeah, well, what's really striking is how different this team looks compared to the one that, made it to the finals last year, this year, but last spring. And but of course, many players are either injured or have left the team, or in the case of Carey Price, very important player, obviously, left for personal reasons. So the team is very different, but not only in the players are different, but the team's attitude seems to be completely different. Jeff Petrie last night or the night before said that the team has no plan, the players don't know where to go on the ice, which is pretty strong criticism of the coach, actually, because the coach obviously is the one designing the plan. So it's a team in very difficult situation, and the new general manager of the team will have major decisions to take. But I think Jeff Petrie's comments will hurt the coach's credibility, not only in the players' room, but for the public. So it remains to be seen, but I expect major changes in the next few weeks.
I'll say something controversial, perhaps, which is my theory is that the Canadiens were awful under Ducharme last year, too. They were awful in the regular season. They limped into the playoffs. They were about to get eliminated by the Leafs, and he got sick. And he was replaced by Luke Richardson, and they started to win. And I think Luke Richardson installed the system and or attitude that got them through the playoffs last year. Ducharme came back and wrote it out. But they've had, not much success under him, but they don't look like they want to have success this year anyway. They look like they want the number one pick.
Yeah, well, maybe they do. Although they haven't been so great at their number one picks or in general. So
no, they haven't.
We'll see.
All right. So another question before we get to Bill 21 that I have for you now that I've got you on the line. Your appointment to the Senate was one of the clear indications that this new process at the Senate was going to be a credible process and it was going to attract high-quality people. Why did you quit?
Well, I realized with a couple of years under my belt that this experiment of a new independent Senate was not really authentic. I mean, the government, although they appointed quote-unquote independent senators, they saw us as if we were liberal senators. We were expected to vote with the government on most important bills. And if we raised concerns opposition to parts of a bill or whatever, the government put pressure on independent senators to ignore these concerns and simply vote in favor of the bill, like
Really?
party discipline, really. And on the other side of the aisle, you faced a conservative opposition who are determined that an independent Senate never happened. Their goal is to paralyze any Senate reform until the conservatives come back to power and they can appoint conservative senators. So I was facing a situation where, of course, I could, I'm 64 years old. I could have stayed in the Senate 11, 12 years. It's a great job. But I was not ready to stay there and just do, what the government wanted me to do and fight an opposition that was determined to scrap any kind of reform. So that's why I left.
So what do you think we should do with the joint now, having come to that conclusion?
Well, I'm still of the view that the original idea of the Senate in a federation like ours is a good idea. An independent process to choose senators is also a good idea, and I hope any other party that is eventually in power will stick with this new system. But I mean, if we are to have an effective Senate, it really needs to be really independent. That is, their role is to review legislation, not to go against the will of the elected chamber, but to review legislation to make sure that in the very disorderly process of the House of Commons, things have not been forgotten or concerns ignored or sometimes mistakes, because we often in the Senate see mistakes in the legislation that haven't been spotted by the government. And of course also to make sure that minorities are protected and that all regional interests are protected. This is the Senate's role, and I think it makes sense, but it does have to be a really independent Senate. And my former colleagues who have had the courage to remain in the Senate, I know are fighting hard for this to happen. But I'm very skeptical that because of the political forces at play, it will happen.
Okay. Well, thanks for clearing that up. I didn't realize that the independent senators felt quite so pressured by the government.
Yeah, they do. It's a difficult situation for them because, of course, the government is the one that appointed them, right? So you feel some sort of
obligation,
moral obligation, I guess, to help the government that appointed you. But at the same time, if you're there to be independent, and when the Prime Minister called me to tell me I would be appointed to the Senate, the conversation was extremely short, lasted about 1 minute and a half. And he told me he wanted to appoint me to the Senate. And I said, I just have one question. He said, yes, what's your question? Will I be allowed to vote according to my conscience? And he said, yes, of course. That's why I appointed independent senators. I said, great. But I realized that the real situation was not like that at all.
Well, you can join a large disappointed club. So let's get to Bill 21. Let's get to Bill 21. Let's start with this. Do you support or oppose this bill, and why?
Well, I oppose the bill for many reasons, but I guess so one reason is that the bill addresses a situation that does not exist. There are extremely few, maybe 1, 2, that's it, teachers in the province who wear a veil or a scarf or, religious signs that are visible. And even in those cases, like in the case of the teacher in Chelsea, the parents love the teachers. They don't have any objection to them wearing this veil or scarf. So the problem does not exist, did not exist. It is based on popular prejudice, and the government wanted to score political points with that, and they succeeded. The bill is supported by over 60% of Quebecers. So that's number one. Number two, it does infringe on freedom of religion. The strange thing is that in Quebec, we're desperately looking for teachers. We have a shortage of teachers.
Yeah.
And amongst the people who speak French, are educated and can teach. You have quite a few Muslim women and men. They speak perfect French in most cases. They would be great additions to our teaching corps. And now, because of the new law, they cannot even apply for a job as a teacher in elementary or secondary school, in high school. So it's discriminatory. And finally, the bill, to protect it from any legal challenge, as you know, the bill contains a notwithstanding clause, and it's the most wide-ranging notwithstanding clause in history. I mean, it pushes aside all the major fundamental rights included in the Canadian Charter, but also in the Quebec Charter. And many opponents, many people who are in favor of the bill say, well, we didn't agree with the Canadian Charter. It was imposed on Quebec in 1982. So, yes, but the bill also pushes aside the Quebec Charter, which was adopted unanimously by the National Assembly 7 years before the Canadian Charter. And of course, the Quebec Charter also protects freedom of religion. So, I mean, there are many aspects of the bill that I profoundly disagree with. But if we get to that, I must say I'm also very uncomfortable with English Canada's reaction to the bill. But we'll get to that.
That's where we're going. But let's try to figure out where the bill's coming from first. So am I wrong to think that anybody your age or older in Quebec was taught by nuns and priests?
That's right. But it stops at about my age, right?
Right.
Because after that...
So what role does that play in all of this?
It plays a major role, and I think that is something that is not well understood outside Quebec. In the 60s and 50s, Quebec was described as a priest-ridden society, and it was. I mean, the church was extremely powerful. It ruled not only major aspects of public life, but also the private lives, especially of women. And so that's number one. With the Quiet Revolution, most Quebecers decided to quickly, abruptly get rid of this power that the church had over their lives. And it's a movement, the movement away from religion is something that you see in all Western societies currently. But the speed with which it happened and the difference between the gap between the incredible power of the church in Quebec before and what happened in the 1960s and 70s is really extraordinary, probably unique in the Western world, the speed with which it happened. So I guess one aspect of Quebecers' reaction to any religion is that the thought is we got rid of religion's power over our lives, and we got rid of, priests and nuns in our schools and crucifix and so on. So why would we allow another religion to attempt again to rule the lives of at least some women and men? So it's not only a matter of, I hear you say Quebecers are prejudiced and racist and whatever. I don't think they're more racist in Quebec than anywhere else. But this reaction to the church and to the power of religion, I think is quite unique and is part of the explanation why Quebecers react so strongly against religions, plural.
We are into my favorite season of the year. No, not rustic, overhopped craft ale that tastes like tree bark season. I hate that season. It's giving season. Well, every season is giving season if you ask me, but this one is kind of famous for it. You all know that our presenting sponsor is TELUS. TELUS is a company with a social purpose, and giving is a core value. In fact, with over $1.2 billion contributed to charitable organizations in Canada, they're the most giving company. Now, you Herle Burlyites are a really influential and caring group. So TELUS would like to challenge you all to help spread the good word so that they can give more. Here's what I mean. This year, as you're reaching out to your local charitable and community organizations, shelters, senior centers, women's and children's charities, etc., if you could please let them know that TELUS has a number of giving programs that can help so many vulnerable Canadians get connected to technology. Mobility for Good is a big one. It distributes free, pre-loved smartphones to youth emerging from foster care so that they can contact the people, resources, and opportunities they need to succeed. Mobility for Good also helps low-income seniors and Indigenous women at risk. We'll talk more about that in the next couple of weeks. So, Herle Burlyites, when you help spread the word this season, you spread access. So take up the challenge. Because when technology becomes more equal for everyone, this country is just better off for it. To find out more, go to telus.com/connectingcanada. What you say about the decline of religion is also true in English Canada. It didn't happen at the same time and in the same pace, but most formerly Christian Canadians are not very religious anymore. And we may have lost the capacity to understand people who are religious. There was in Saskatchewan in the 1920s a government that was allied with the Ku Klux Klan, and they hated Catholics. And so they brought in a law that nuns and priests couldn't wear their garb in public. Nuns couldn't wear their habits in public. To her death, my mother, who was a devout Catholic, thought this was one of the great outrages in Saskatchewan's history, right? Because she believed that. So people go, well, why don't they just take it off and go teach? I mean, are we losing a tolerance for religion, and is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, yes, I think we do. I think in Quebec in particular, because most people have rejected, let's call it established religion, because many Quebecers still believe in God or a God or whatever. They're just against established religions. So I think most people have become intolerant to the religious phenomenon and have forgotten that for many people, including newcomers in our society, religion plays an important role. I was reading a column by a former leader of the Parti québécois and foremost intellectual in Quebec, Jean-François Lisée, who was writing a couple of days ago that, anyways, most religions are based on false historical facts and, beliefs in magic tricks and things like that, miracles, and so they don't make any sense. And therefore, in his view, freedom of religion is not important because religions are stupid, right? Well, I disagree profoundly. I'm not terribly religious person, but I think we need to respect people for whom it's important. And we know that many people in Quebec, as in other parts of the country and the continent, many people change views about religion, depending on what period of their lives they're in. We know of many people who, on their deathbed, realize that maybe they believe in God, and religion is important. So we need to respect
John Turner told me there's no atheists in a foxhole.
Yes, that's right. So that's exactly right. So I think we need to respect that. I mean, there are millions and millions and millions of people who believe in God and who are parts of a religion and for whom it's important for some of them to demonstrate their faith in public and not only in private. We need to respect that, of course, as long as it does not infringe with other people's rights. And that's another part of the reason why Bill 21 exists and was passed, because most Quebecers nowadays don't care about religion, don't understand the religious phenomenon because they've gotten rid of it. And for them, religion is synonymous with discipline and abuse of all kinds, and they just don't get it. They just don't get it.
So most Quebecers support this bill, and among Francophone Quebecers, the support levels would be higher than 60%. Mm-hmm. Do they think it's anti-Muslim? Do they think they're being anti-Muslim?
No, they don't. And the supporters of the law, always make the point that the law is not discriminatory because it applies to all religions. But of course, that's not true. because it applies only to religions that require or suggest that people practice their religion or show that they're part of the religion in public, right?
Right.
It's not the case of the Catholic religion, except for priests and nuns at the time, not today. I mean, priests and nuns today, most of them don't even wear their religious garb. But so the law applies to religions that require people to wear a sign or a symbol. And these sign or symbols that Quebecers react very strongly to happen to be Muslim symbols. For instance, there's something quite interesting. In the debate in Quebec, there's a confusion around the terms. We use the term voile in French, which is veil, which really means something that covers your face, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, in the case
How
of
about the hijab?
Exactly. So it's a I don't know how you call it exactly. If in English, if there's another
It's a
term,
scarf over your hair.
It's a scarf
over your hair.
That's what it is. So I mean, frankly, to say that, to pretend that a teacher in third grade wearing a scarf over her hair is trying to convince young girls and young boys at school to switch religion if they have one and become Muslim is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. But again, Quebecers are very uncomfortable with any kinds of religion until they're faced with a teacher that actually wears a scarf and realize that, boy, she's a good teacher.
Right.
And another interesting fact is that the law, the act, does not apply to kindergarten. As you know, in Quebec, we have a very extensive childcare program, and the place where there are more, I don't have statistics, but anecdotal evidence shows that the place where there are more teachers, women who wear a scarf over their hair is kindergarten or the public childcare system. And no parent has ever complained about anything. So what's the problem? Again, I come back to my first point. We're making all this trouble, controversy, to try to solve a non-existent problem.
Well, the lower mainland of British Columbia is no longer cut off from the rest of Canada. Washed out roads and rail links in the province's interior have been largely re-established. And the story of BC's worst flooding in modern history is already fading from newscasts and front pages. But of course, for British Columbians who've suffered through remarkably severe weather this year, let's not forget that same area was burned by some of the hottest temperatures on Earth just 6 months ago, the disaster continues. BC's Deputy Premier, with great understatement, has said that the scope of the damage inflicted by repeated atmospheric rivers was extraordinary. Our sponsor, CN, has been at the heart of the relief efforts and can vouch for that. The railway has donated $100,000 to the Red Cross. CN sent more than 400 people into the region when the floods hit, and they've been working 24/7 since. They've helped rescue stranded residents. They've ferried healthcare workers to isolated areas. They've delivered medical equipment. Oh, and they've done some serious engineering. CN had 58 track outages spread across 245 kilometers. All are now passable. In the process, CN employees used 110 pieces of heavy equipment to move 282,000 cubic yards of rock and earth and sludge. The fact is, CN is part of the communities its tracks run through. The people who live in those cities and towns are its neighbors. A lot of CN's employees in British Columbia make their homes in the interior. In any case, news headlines might fade, but CN will not. It will be there working side by side with British Columbians until the cleanup is done. BC can count on it. Okay, so let's just be clear about that. I was curious about this. Who was calling for this law before Legault introduced it? Was there public demand for this law?
There was public demand for something to be done, because over the last 15 years before the law was adopted, there have been several controversies, usually based on anecdotes, where women had asked that the access to the pool be only reserved to women at certain periods of time and not men, because Muslim women wanted to bathe alone, separate from men. These kinds of controversies arose time and time again in Quebec. And many people and there was even a commission of inquiry on these controversies, the Bouchard-Taylor Commission. And they came to the conclusion that in most cases, these were not really controversies. They were based on fake news, if you wish. But they recommended that people in a position of authority, public officials in a position of authority, that is judges and police officers mostly, be required not to wear any religious sign, because the justice system should be seen as neutral in regards to religion. That was the consensus in Quebec for 5 or 6 years. But strangely enough, for some unclear reason, the Legault government, when they came in power in 2018, decided to extend this requirement also to teachers, which of course makes it more widespread and more controversial for all sorts of reasons. And that the fact, I don't think it's so much the fact that they adopted this particular policy, but more the fact that they acted in what was perceived as a determined manner to quote unquote solve the problem. That's what makes it really popular. I'm not sure, people are very much aware of the consequences. When you talk to people about the impact of the notwithstanding clause, people don't really care. They have the perception that that what the law will do is prevent people from coming into class with a burqa, and so they don't want this, so they approve the law. But when you talk to people and explain the consequences and the different parts of the bill or of the law that are fragile from a constitutional point of view, they tend to think more. And that's my hope, is that we'll have a continuing debate on this law. The courts will rule on the law, the Quebec Appeal Court and then the Supreme Court. And my hope is that if we have a respectful and intelligent debate on the law, eventually some other party may come in and decide to amend it.
So
but I'm being very naive.
I'm going to constitutionally nerd out here for just a second. So,
yeah,
the evidence is accumulating, Andre, that nobody anywhere in Canada cares about whether governments use the notwithstanding clause or not. Ford government has used it. Other governments have used it. People try to make a big deal, and nobody cares. So the argument that it would be controversial and difficult to use the notwithstanding clause is proven not to be true anywhere. But our charter is unique in that it has section 1 of the charter already qualifies the rights that are in the charter, subject to such limitation as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So this bill exists because of the notwithstanding clause. The court would have struck it down had the government not preemptively used section 33, the notwithstanding clause, to bring it in. When you bring in a law using the notwithstanding clause, you are admitting that a court would not find your actions to be reasonable in a free and democratic society. Why doesn't that argument have any impact?
I think because what you've just said, most people are not aware of this and don't really understand this. What is specific and worrisome about what's in Bill 21, the law, the act, is the way they use the notwithstanding clause, right? They, for instance, they say that the law will apply notwithstanding a series of clauses in the Canadian Charter and the 38 first articles of the Quebec Charter. Think about this. The 38 first articles and the major articles of the Canadian Charter, which include the right to life, the right to private property, the right to organize for labor purposes, the right to vote, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience. All these rights are pushed aside to prevent the law from being challenged. I mean, this is incredible. I mean, if someone, for any reason that you can imagine, at one point would feel that the law threatens their life, they could not go to court to say, well, this is unfair. No, you can't make this argument in front of the court because the law is protected. So, I mean, I think in Quebec, most people don't realize this aspect of it. It's not only that it's complicated, it's that very, very few people make this argument. There was another columnist, influential columnist in my former newspaper, La Presse, Yves Boisvert, who last week highlighted the fact that people who are against Bill 21 in Quebec, who cannot therefore be accused of Quebec bashing, are put in a very difficult situation because the government of Quebec itself says that people who are against the bill are against Quebec, right? And the bill is supported by a majority, and therefore you can't challenge it because the majority of Quebecers are. And again, that's
which is precisely why you have a charter. Discrimination is always supported by a majority of people. Right?
Exactly. And we have many cases in our history in Canada and specifically in Quebec where, in the times of Duplessis, for instance, we adopted laws that were against communists and laws that were against the Jehovah's Witnesses, laws that were struck by the Supreme Court, thankfully, but that were at the time supported by a majority. And it's very strange that today Mr. Duplessis in Quebec is seen like a quote unquote sort of a dictator, right? With a very bad reputation. But we're doing the same thing. We're repeating the same mistake again.
So what is Legault's agenda in doing this? So there was not much demand for him to do this, especially with regard to teachers. He probably knew it was going to be a big provocation. You wrote an article in the National Post saying that he will be delighted at the opposition that is emerging in English Canada about it. What's he trying to do? And what I'm really asking you is, I know people in Quebec who tell me they think this guy wants a referendum.
Well, I know people think that. I'm not sure that was the purpose at the beginning of the process. But I mean, Mr. Legault's political party is made of a sort of a fusion of federalist elements and separatist elements. But I think there are more separatists than federalists, both in his party and certainly in his cabinet and entourage. And yes, sure, they'd be delighted with another opportunity to have a referendum on Quebec's future. I mean, let's try to imagine a scenario, and whether Mr. Legault thought about this before doing this, or whether he's thinking about it now, I'm not sure. He's very preoccupied with the pandemic, obviously. But I mean, let's say the Supreme Court finds a way to rule that this law is unconstitutional. What will happen? So I cannot imagine Mr. Legault being a nationalist like he is. I cannot imagine that he would just say, okay, then we'll just strike the law and nothing happened. I think he will fight it. And what are the ways of fighting it? Well, one way of fighting it is having a referendum, at least on the law itself, to show that, Quebecers support the law very strongly. So to make what was a legal argument by the Supreme Court, to make it a political issue. So that's the least he could do, right? And that's a referendum. And but of course he could do much more depending on the climate, the political atmosphere here. And he would not. He never said that he was not a separatist anymore. He just said that it was not the time for independence, and there were other priorities, and so on. And we'll see in 10 years. That's what he said repeatedly. So, I mean, when the Supreme Court renders its decision, will be about 10 years after the first times he said that. So maybe he will have a referendum on Quebec's future. And we know that at times when English Canada for one reason or another, decides that Quebec should not do this or should not do that, Quebecers rally around their government. And Mr. Legault is already extremely popular. And I'm pretty sure that in such situation, he gets support like Mr. Bourassa had after the Meech Lake Accord failed, which was, you had 70% of people who were in favor of separation if Mr. Bourassa went this way, which he didn't, thankfully.
So in English Canada, a bill like this is seen by people who are attached to the liberal, pluralistic vision of the Charter as a major frontal attack on what Canada represents and stands for. Can you just explain to my listeners how the Francophone majority of Quebec, but minority in Canada, minority in North America, sees these things differently?
That's a very good question, because when you look at Quebec's history, although obviously it's been a different history and, different culture and whatever, I mean, Quebec is a liberal society, not in the partisan sense, but in the philosophical sense of the word liberal. And when you look at our institutions, the fact that we have a charter, the protection of individual rights in Quebec and so on, the minorities are well protected. So it's a liberal society. And the Bouchard-Taylor Commission, which we mentioned a bit earlier, came to that conclusion. Quebec is a liberal society, and therefore prohibitions of all kinds are not part of our nature. So again, what happened in this particular case is not absolutely clear in my mind, but I think it's tied to a general sense in Quebec that their culture, language, way of life are threatened, particularly in this moment, and therefore that anything that appears to go against the majority's cultural identity is threatening and should be prohibited or fought or whatever. And I think that's what happened in the case of this law, of the concern, the fear of the Muslim faith and of Islam and Muslim signs and so on. I think people see it as a threat against what they fought for, right? A secular society where the rights of women are respected and so on. And their view of Islam is that it's a society, a religion that is not, is oppressive to women. And so it's hard to explain. And I certainly get the sense that understand perfectly why many people in the rest of Canada would feel that, it's an attack against what they believe in. Although we have to admit also that polls show that there is some support for this kind of law outside Quebec
the individual measures, the individual
65%.
measures would be strongly supported in many parts of the country, for sure. Absolutely. But the politicians don't pander to that in the rest of the country.
No. That's right. That's exactly right. Yes. So, I understand the frustration and the anger, but I think what English Canada must reflect on is what is the best way of channeling these feelings and these thoughts so that we can try to solve this problem together. Although there is a majority in favor of the law as they understand it, there are also 40% of Quebecers who disagree with the law. So that's many people, and these people are currently trying and fighting to eventually get this law changed by another political party once they're in power. And I think what English Canada has to do is ideally get in touch with these people and try to understand what it can do to contribute positively to solving this issue. And I think, you have to be careful about the words that you use in characterizing the legislation and the government of Quebec and the people of Quebec, so that you make your point pretty clear that what you're against is the law as it is written, and not Quebec in general. Because that,
Right.
when we read social media, which I guess we shouldn't, but when we read social media, the reaction of many is that in fact they just want Quebec to go. And I don't want Quebec to go. I've been fighting against this for years, and so I want us to try to solve the problem together. And I think that will, in the long term, it will be more fruitful than simply an all-out attack against, Quebec as being racist or prejudiced or whatever.
So up until this past week, federal politicians have contorted themselves to stay out of this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Many people in the rest of Canada, by the way, that's an old term. Do people still use that term anymore? ROC? Yeah.
The rest of Canada?
Okay,
they do here, yeah.
In the rest of Canada, a lot of people have seen politicians' performance on this as craven weakness, selling out human rights to get votes in Quebec. Anne McGrath, I asked Anne McGrath, who ran the NDP campaign, why in the world Jagmeet Singh didn't see the same politics that Patrick Brown is seeing in Peel region on this issue and campaign against it. And she said, because we were worried about the unity implications of it. We didn't want to open a Pandora's box with it. Is that weakness or strategy?
I think it's a bit of both. Let me talk first about the Prime Minister. I understand the Liberals' concerns about losing votes in Quebec, but I'm not sure they would have lost a vote, really, depending on how he did it. I mean, in my view, although I am concerned about the political impacts of campaigns against the bill outside Quebec, I think Quebecers would understand that the Prime Minister stands for the Canadian Charter of Rights. And in the past, Mr. Trudeau has taken strong positions on some of these issues, and it has not prevented him from winning seats in Quebec. I think that is what Quebecers expect of him. They might not agree with him fighting the Bill 21, but they wouldn't be surprised, because that's his role as Prime Minister, to protect Canadians' fundamental rights and to protect the Charter. So his way of saying, I'm against the law, but I won't fight it, I think is a sign of weakness. And I think it hurts people like me who are trying to fight against this law, because if the government of Canada does not fight it, who will? And to paraphrase, famous sentences, if they don't do it now, when, right? So the real problem is, the difficulty really is not whether federal leaders have the courage to stand up against the law. The real problem is, what should they do? Once they've condemned the law and say it's horrific and we'll send our best lawyers in front of the Supreme Court and whatever, okay, good. We'll see what the Supreme Court eventually decides. But is there something else that they can do? And this is what worries me, is I hear pressure from different other regions of the country, people who say, they should use this power or that power, they should strike the law and whatever. And that really concerns me.
You don't think disallowance would go over well? You don't think Quebecers you don't think they're aware of the power of disallowance exists in the Canadian Constitution?
Yeah, and I don't think that would go very well in Quebec. I think that would be a disastrous scenario. So you see, there's a fine line, I think, between the Prime Minister defending Canadians' fundamental rights and the Charter, and going all out against the law without thinking of the consequences of this law. I mean, the separatist movement has never been so weak in Quebec as it is now, right? But it wouldn't take much.
It never does.
And it never does, of course. But and when I see society in both parts of the country, there are many parts of the country, but in Quebec and in the ROC, as you said, such a simplification of Canadian reality. But in any case, when I hear that, it worries me. It worries me that it will help this, nearly movement on its deathbed wake up again. And I don't want this. It's not good for Quebec. It's not good for Canada. We've been in this movie before, and I think no one wants to be in it again. We don't want to live through this again. So let's find the means to express our convictions strongly, but by being careful of not making the situation worse than it presently is.
Okay, I mean, in personal terms, I really get this. Insider can talk. I may have thoughts about my family members, but if you were to voice them, I would fucking take you on, right? Okay, you can't talk about my family, right? So I get that mentality. Is Trudeau part of the family?
I think for the vast majority of Quebecers, he is.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that if he made a strong argument, and if he made it repeatedly, in all his speeches and television interviews and so on, people would at least listen and maybe not change their views, but see things a bit differently. I've met the Prime Minister a couple of times, and when he speaks of something that he really believes in, he can be very strong. He comes out very strongly. And I know he believes in this. I know he's against this law, that it goes against, everything he believes in. So at some point, especially at this time, he's been reelected twice. Every commentator appears to believe that he's in the last years and eventually he will resign. Maybe that's not true. Not you. Okay. But in any case, he's become a senior statesman. And I think if you're at that stage and you don't fight for what you really believe in, there's an issue. Will there be a political cost in Quebec for the Liberals? Maybe. But at some point, politics has to be to fight for what you believe in, for your convictions. So I understand all the compromises that are part of, and not to make an unfair comparison, but I'm pretty convinced that his father would not stand aside like this while this is happening, whatever the political costs. And probably actually he would not suffer such terrible costs, because he would make it in a very convinced and rational manner. He would make people think, like he did when he was in government and René Lévesque was in government in Quebec City.
Trudeau the Elder was more of a decentralist than people think of him these days, and he was accommodating to Quebec's demands in a lot of respects. But he had red lines, there's no doubt. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think when you have a government that passes a law that infringes on fundamental rights, that should be a red line. And we know that's what the Prime Minister thinks, because he said so. But he says so, in a brief sentence in a press conference on another topic. And it says he doesn't want to anger the government or the people, so he's not going to intervene until it comes to the Supreme Court, where maybe he will send federal lawyers. The government of Quebec is running constant advertisements on television, in newspapers, and so on, about this law and about things that are, related to this law. And the government of Canada is just nowhere to be seen.
They're afraid of it. They're afraid of it, man. They're afraid of it.
Yes. And when they do it, they don't do it in the right manner. Like, I'll give you two examples. Mark Miller said it was a cowardly law, Why use this word? How does this help debate to say that, the government that passed this law is coward?
That was the wording. That was the wording that Shachi Curl rejected for her question.
Right. And so it doesn't help, right? And when Bob Rae suddenly, whom we haven't heard about for months, suddenly decides that he intervenes as the Canadian ambassador to the UN, I know what he's trying to do, and I don't disagree with the content of what he said, but why now? And why not about China and other countries that have no care at all for fundamental rights. So that's what I mean when I say that yes, the English Canada is right to be concerned. Yes, it is their business because it is their country as much as Canada is our country. But just reflect on how it is that you can contribute to solving the problem rather than simply, making lots of noise, which may very well worsen the situation.
How do you think this mayor's initiative, this big city's initiative of Patrick Brown's, would be received if it came together? As I understand it, Calgary has signed on, I think, already. As I understand it, they don't intend to intervene. They just said there's a massive financial imbalance between the people that would want to oppose it and the Quebec government, and we'll address that financial imbalance by funding them. Seems clever to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm all for, movements to help people who are fighting the law. So you may have, Quebec municipalities who will also decide to raise money for the people, not the government of Quebec, but the groups and individuals who are in favor of the law. My only concern is, why would a mayor intervene in this
domestic
debate?
Politics.
I'm not too
domestic
sure.
Politics.
But yes, I guess
sure.
It's popular.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get that.
Patrick Brown is a mayor of Peel region, has a lot of South Asians. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's political. I get that. So I don't think this initiative in particular will have major impact. But it just, I made the point in a column that I published in a French magazine a couple of days ago. I made the point that we exaggerated when we Quebecers were exaggerating when we talked about Quebec bashing, that there was no Quebec bashing. There were people commentating on the law, and it's their right to it's the right of other Canadians to comment on what goes on in Quebec. We certainly don't hesitate to do it in Quebec, criticizing, different regions of the country. But I mean, if it comes to the point where everyone feels that they have to criticize the law and mount campaigns against the law and use sometimes regrettable language in talking about Quebec and the government of Quebec, again, is it going to help? It may just confirm, nationalists and separatist views that Quebec that Canada is in general hostile to whatever Quebec wants to do. It's an exaggeration, but it may just confirm that. So
you know how it ends. It ends with Brian Tobin, Sheila Copps, and a giant Canadian flag in downtown Montreal,
which would not help. Which would not help. You know that it's very strange about this Canada rally is that separatists are convinced that it helped the Federalist cause in 1995. When polls actually show that the reverse happened.
Sure, I know. Right? That's why I was making the point.
Right, exactly. So, anyways, I understand. Again, to repeat myself, I understand the concern and the anger and the frustration. But I think the best way to resolve this is, again, to let's try to have a dialogue. Let's try to work together, the people who oppose the law in Quebec with people outside Quebec, rather than just making a lot of noise and statements which in the end will not really help, right? Because again, the tools to change the law that was adopted by a majority in the National Assembly and is supported by a large number of Quebecers, the tools to change that are not in the hands of of people in Peel region, they're in the hands of Quebecers. Even if the Supreme Court rules, in the end, Quebecers will decide. So the only way out of this in a democratic society is to debate this and continue fighting it then until it becomes politically acceptable to change the law. And I think it's possible to do this. I mean, the Liberal Party of Quebec has opposed the law. So when they come in power, for instance, for now, they haven't said what they would do if they come in government eventually. But we have to push them and convince them that if they do become the government of Quebec in 2 years, or in 1 year, or 4 years, or 5 years, that they should change. They should amend the law to render it.
Well, they could hardly have less French support than they do now, no matter what position they took on anything. So, I mean,
Yes. So again, if you're in politics and you're not getting much support in any case, why not fight for your
right.
convictions?
What could somebody like me do? What's the right way for me to help?
Well, I think you have to find supporters of the law who can explain better probably than I can why they support the law. What is it in their own lives that made them decide that a lady with a scarf on her hair is not suitable to teach children in Quebec? Uh, Sometimes I myself fail to understand this. I try to explain it as rationally as I can, but it's frankly it's not easy. Uh, to start with, my experience with religion was not negative at all. I was taught by priests, by Jesuits, and it was a very positive experience. So I don't have the kind of negative experience that many Quebecers have had. So, yeah, I think again, I'm being very naive, but my in my view, the best prime minister Canada has ever had is Wilfrid Laurier, and he was very naive also, but he was a fantastic prime minister for the times. And he always believed that dialogue, even with your adversaries, is the most productive way of dealing with problems. He's always done that in his political life. When you read his correspondence, he was always trying to have respectful discussions with adversaries to try to convince them to find some compromise, so on, so that countries can survive. And I think it happens very often in a country like Canada, we're in a situation where dialogue is more important than ever. And someone like you, with your credibility, can help in encouraging dialogue between Quebecers of all convictions on this particular law and other Canadians of good faith to talk and try to understand each other and find if at some point we cannot find a compromise. Sometimes compromises don't come easily. Many times it takes time. It doesn't happen instantly, like we know in our private lives, right? Compromises are not easy to arrive at, but that's what this country is built on, right? We're built on dialogue and compromise, and the moment we quit that, our country
such an
is
interesting
threatened.
point, Andre, because the times are so wrong for that. I mean, I can't think of a dirtier word in politics than compromise. It means you're unprincipled. It means you don't stand for anything, right?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, again, I'm a very idealistic person, and but ideals are what again make countries possible. It's both ideals and compromise. In French, there's a distinction between compromis, which is compromise, and compromission, which is an acceptable compromise, a compromise that goes against your principles. So, I mean, I think in politics, the best politicians are people who have, strong beliefs, strong convictions that have been the result of of a life sometimes outside politics, where they built there and they mature, and then they get into politics. And of course, politics, brings you to all kinds of compromises, tactical and strategic and whatever. But at least you have these principles, these red lines, as you said earlier, that you cannot cross because they will go against what is profoundly you. So I think that's the difference. I mean, Canada cannot survive without compromise, and we've done many, many compromises in our history. But we have to stay, we have to stay convinced of the few things that are the basis of this country. And one of the things that is the basis of the country is the belief in fundamental rights. And so, and it's true in Quebec also. I mean, again, I remind you that the charter in Quebec, which is a model for the Canadian charter, was adopted unanimously in the National Assembly in 1975, so 7 years before the Canadian charter. So, I mean, Quebecers are not against fundamental rights, but there's a misunderstanding here on this particular point, on this issue of scarves on women's hair. So let's not, I mean, certainly I don't think the issue was worth a law that is, in my view, profoundly mistaken, but it's not worth it's neither is it worth a constitutional crisis or a national crisis. It just requires dialogue so that misunderstandings are slowly chipped on and destroyed, and eventually we can find a solution. Again, I realize this is very idealistic, but this is Canada.
Well, it also doesn't give me a solution tomorrow, which is the other thing about our society, which is, what are you talking about? Some long process. I want this fixed tomorrow. But anyway.
Yeah, of course. So do I.
Hey, fantastic conversation. Thank you for the depth that you brought to this. I've enjoyed exploring this with you. I may seek your counsel in the future again on this, because I don't know that it's going to go away, and I don't know that Legault is going away. Again.
Well, thank you. Very nice. It's been very kind of you to have me, and I appreciated the conversation. It's fun when it's more than 30 seconds.
For sure. All right. Thank you to my presenting sponsor, TELUS, and to my sponsor, CN Rail, and thank all you Herle Burlyites for listening and watching. André Pratte writes frequently, and you can follow his thoughts in major newspapers and publications throughout the country. And we were lucky to have him today. So take care, everybody. We'll see you later.